Skye Wallace, you are a Vancouver based singer, songwriter, and musician, and I would like to welcome you to York Avenue Productions.
Hey, yeah, thank you for having me. Stoked to be here.
Thanks for coming. It's a pleasure to have you. We're curious about your songwriting style and wonder if you could tell us something about the approach you take. For example, could you say something about the first song you wrote and when and why you wrote
Hmm.
it?
Well, I was thinking about this. I think technically I would like to not include this as my first song, but like technically I was starting to write music when I discovered the Spice Girls and the Backstreet Boys. So unfortunately, there exists, I don't think there's recordings anywhere. I don't think they're written down anywhere, but in my head still, I have those first songs and they are like
No problem. That's good. I
yeah,
like the Spice
absolutely. They're
Girls. Go
very
on.
like pop like I was what 10, 9, 10. So that was kind of the material that I was getting into at that point. But I'd say like the first time that I took ownership of like, okay, I'm like writing a song, I'm learning an instrument, I'm singing and like constructing a song would be I was reading a Neil Young book. I was listening to a lot of Neil Young. I had my brother's banjo, and I had wanted to play guitar, but I didn't have one yet. So I just started like playing some things on banjos, kind of artsy, and that was my first set of real songs, as it were. And I started performing those in high
Oh, the
school.
banjo. I think John Lennon started on a
Yeah,
banjo too, so you've got something
yeah.
behind you like
You
that.
work with what you
So
got.
you work with what you got. And what sort of inspiration do you have in that song? What was it a song about anything in
I
particular?
think I, at that point, was wanting, I guess I kind of wanted to emulate what I was hearing. So there's a lot of like, love songs that aren't about anyone in particular, just kind of like wetting my feet. I feel like it took me a while to be able to really dig down deep. And this is really funny because actually the song was called Down Deep. Now that I'm thinking about like what was the first one, I'm pretty sure the
Oh,
song was called Down Deep. But it took
it wasn't tell me what you
no,
want, what you
no,
really,
no,
really
no,
want. It wasn't
but
that
I
sort.
mean,
No.
it certainly wasn't. It was deep in the way that a 15-year-old person can be, for sure, really deep. But I wasn't really accessing those points at that point in my songwriting, which is great.
Did you see at that time, did you see yourself writing more songs, like a future in that?
Definitely, yeah. Like from then, I started learning guitar. Got my own guitar, and I started busking. I played a couple of talent shows at my high school. I did a couple of like events at like they had this place. I grew up on this place called the Sunshine Coast um, for part of my childhood, and I went to high school there. And it's on the
Mhm.
west coast of Canada. Very small communities, and they had these really cool events going on at this Heritage Playhouse. That was like the theater in town. So sometimes I'd be like the intermission show, or I'd get like opening slots for bands coming through, and that was kind of where I got my start.
Oh, and that's good because probably you didn't have that much competition either in a small town,
Huge,
right?
yeah. It was amazing to have that incubator where it's like I got booked for my first festival that way. It was this one called Creek Days, and otherwise it's such a catch-22 to start music, like a music career, because it's like you can't get booked unless you've been booked. And so you like I kind of having that incubation period on the Sunshine Coast was amazing. Also, I feel like I was surrounded by a lot of DIY kind of sentiments at that time. And so
Mm-hmm.
like my first show in Vancouver when I was young was I asked a coffee shop if it would be okay if I brought a PA in and invited all my friends and had a show, and they were like, yeah, sure. And that was my first show in Vancouver.
Good for you. Well done. You're quite entrepreneur in
Yeah,
that sense.
I was just trying to figure it out.
Good for you.
Still
Yeah,
am.
sounds fascinating. So, how do you typically write a song, and what is the relation for you between the lyrics and the music?
I think very, very tightly woven for me. Like I want to make music that makes me feel something. I want it to evoke something specific in my chest or my heart or my gut. And so the story that goes along with it is very important, whatever that may be, whether it's like, you know, your own story or a story that you're telling of someone else's. I tend to write. I think initially I do tend to go for the music unless I have something already in my mind. And I'll go with we mentioned the Beatles, the classic, the syntax type of thing where, like, you know, how yesterday was scrambled eggs initially, because like I know I want
Mm-hmm.
the syntax to move like this and be this, like this kind of rhythmic. So I think I do tend towards saying what I need it to sound like rather than what the words absolutely need to be. And you can find your way to the story so many different ways that I think that's been a very like clarifying method for me. But it's also been really cool to be co-writing with a lot of folks over the last couple of years, and just like challenging your process, shifting your process, because everybody does it differently, um, and there's no correct way of doing it. So it's kind of like a cool challenge to just like pivot and, you know, find where your strengths are in various contexts with different people. You might not even know them very well, so that's been a big growing point for me.
Do you have it so that the music comes to you first, and then later you find lyrics that will fit in with that?
Yeah, sometimes the initial outset of a song will just be like a line and melody in my head that comes together first. Actually, that's a lot of my new
Mm-hmm.
songs have been like, oh, I have an idea for this one line, and then I can kind of start to build around that. So I do think initially I would say the words and the music do come first together in a weird way.
Yeah. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
That's interesting. And then,
Then I start to build the music, I think, then syntax, and then the words kind of flow.
okay. So, is there a typical way that the melody comes to you, or does it just sort of appear out of nowhere, or what
It
happens
can
exactly?
appear out of nowhere. I'm a kind of person who I'm singing constantly, and it's like to the detriment of my roommates and partner and all this thing. Like I just always have. So
Yeah.
yeah, it's definitely. I think just because it's always kind of going, sometimes things just kind of like are pulled out of the ether, and I'm like, ooh, I like that. So I always have you know, like voice memos on the go for later. That's good for songwriting sessions too. It's like,
Yeah.
here's a bunch of ideas that I've had. I'll keep a notes app, like just a note open to write down lyrics that come,
Mm-hmm.
and then you can kind of like, you know, it comes to life in different ways at different times. But it's just nice to have that arsenal of ideas constantly flowing.
Yeah, and the voice memos are very convenient, aren't they? You could just, pull it out and then it's not
Yeah,
gone. Whereas before that was here, you had to repeat it and repeat it to
totally.
yourself or something to
Yeah.
keep that.
Or like, don't you hate it when a song comes to you at night and you're like, I gotta get out of bed, do all this, but at least you like it's a, you know, a quick memo away from going back to
Yeah, you can
sleep.
grab you can grab your
Yeah,
voice memo and go
yeah,
for it
because you
like
won't
that.
remember it, guaranteed.
No, it's like a
Yeah,
dream you'll
exactly.
wake up. Okay, what do you feel the relation is between music and other
Mhm.
art forms?
I think very closely knit. I think art's presence in community, in just cultures, and I think it's a humongous connective tool. It's a humongous um, just like tool of processing, of emotion, of relationships. I think it's I'm doing a lot of like grant writing in Canada. There's like a really wonderful set of programs for funding to support various art forms and all the arts. So that includes like dance, visual art, music, etc.
Hmm.
And one project I've been working on is one with my mom, where she's done a lot of this land art. Um, and just getting into the nitty gritty of talking about like the ephemerality, the like non permanence of that has kind of gotten me into a state of just like considering art in general. And so like she's making this interactive experience. I'm going to be doing the score for the
Oh,
exhibition, and
okay.
it's kind of caused me to think about the relationship between music and art and all these things. I think I my mom comes from an expressive art therapy background, and so the idea with
All
that
right.
is that everyone is the expert in what they need already, and so to provide them with a creative outlet through which they can process and like try on different identities, be in their body differently, is the way of doing that. It's like the thing that, like, humans are naturally very creative beings, even if, like, I'm not an artist, I'm not a songwriter. Everybody is artistic innately, and different pieces of
Mm-hmm.
themselves will open up when they create. So I think just the presence of art, the access to art, is really, really important to me. I think um, when I'm playing shows, just the way that people open up emotionally within, like, just to themselves, to other people. I've had like people I don't know come up in tears and talk to me about how certain songs have affected them and how it changed their day this day, or like how it got them through a tough time. And I think like there's just such a power that I don't even know if we understand, but it's so necessary, and it fuels everything that I think people can lack in their lives, and it can be a detriment. So for me, like, yeah, I guess it's the connectivity, it's the spirit of us all. And I think like when I want to create a piece of music, I want all these other pieces kind of informed. Like the aesthetic's really important to me. The the
Mm-hmm.
different ways that you can interact with people, be it via social media, can be an art form. There's all these different ways in which we get people to engage. So it's like it already is so intertwined. So I guess that's my goal going forward, is to see how those things can also be permeated with my work.
So that's the purpose of music
Hmm.
for you. The purpose is to somehow connect to feelings and emotions and express them to
Yeah,
other
yeah.
people.
I think there's a means of conveying emotion with art that you can't necessarily always put into words, and it's quite transformative. And I think like in a society, like art can be radical. It can be communicative. It can be
Yes.
all these things that we pr- provocative. It can give meaning and purpose. Like I do think that it's so important, and it does get overlooked in a lot. Like on Ontario, just the provincial government here hasn't been very arts focused for the last little while, and we've seen like it's definitely just to the detriment of the people, because we all do need art. It doesn't have it's hard to quantify, but I do think that deep down art is the thing that is bringing us all together and pulling us forward in a lot of ways.
Yeah, it's very interesting, like where music came from in our history. Like, how did that
Hmm.
first start? You know,
Yeah.
it's we see birds
Hmm.
singing, right?
Yeah.
They sing, but for us, like it's talking that's the
Yeah.
communication, the main way of
Hmm.
logically connecting with each other. So it is very peculiar what music
Yeah.
is doing.
Yeah. And it's straight to the heart of the thing. Like you can make someone feel a certain way and understand a certain feeling immediately with a song, which is really.
Yeah, and a feeling that you can't put into
Hmm.
words
Hmm.
too, right? That you can't say what that melody is doing to you, but it's somehow creating a
Hmm.
space that can be beautiful and
Yeah.
terrifying and
Yeah.
sad and
Yeah.
nostalgic.
And crosses language as well. Like, you know, you can not understand the words someone's saying in the music, but you can understand what they mean. So I think that's pretty, especially in everything's it's a global world now. It's a global market.
A lot of your music seems to be quite
Hmm.
angry, that you're upset,
Yeah.
and there's tear a piece of me
Oh
and
yeah.
tough
Yeah.
kid and tooth and
Yeah.
nail. Is that sort of like a main
I don't think
theme with
so.
you, or is it
I'm
just
I'm not an
something?
angry person. I do think there are times where my music has occupied like a kind of punk thing, and I do think that like I have a bit of
Yes.
angst to my whole
Mm.
vibe generally. Um, but
All right.
I don't think it's from a place of anger. I think sometimes it's like moving through things and like processing the emotions on my own part. But things like Tough Kid is about the death of fear. So like even though it might,
Yeah.
you know, touch on like, people don't think you're going to make it whatever, but it's like that everybody goes through that. And I think that's a universal thing, is that like people feel doubted, they feel doubt within themselves, and to shed that is a huge weight. So I think like things like that too. It's like there's anger in everything, and there's also joy, and so I think
Hmm.
yeah, I'm curious about that and do experiment.
Yeah, and one doesn't have to be angry to make an
Hmm.
angry song, right? I mean, you can use that as your what you want to
Yeah,
express, right? You want to have that idea, or you might want to have a melancholic song, even though you're not feeling
absolutely.
melancholic, but just try to express it in
Yeah,
music
that's
and
right.
words.
Yeah, and then like something like Terra Peace can be a way of like, like I don't want to harbor this kind of anger. It's a lot about like people who like would come up to you after your show and explain your pedals to you, or like people who like music industry stuff where like people just want to like gatekeep and things like that. So it's like things that I'm actually frustrated with, but it's like maybe I'll just put it into a fun song, and then I won't harbor that
Yeah.
in my body because that's bad for you.
You mentioned
Hmm.
punk earlier, and I'm curious as to who are the musicians who have mostly influenced you, and how have they influenced you? Is punk, because that sort of fits with the
Yeah,
anger too, right? And God
yeah,
Save the Queen and
yeah. I do. I mean, like,
Anarchy in the
I do love the
UK.
Sex Pistols. I went through a big phase when I was
Yeah, they're
in, I think I
brilliant.
was
They're
in grade
brilliant.
10 or something. But like, yeah, I'd say like when I was just coming up as far as like finding my own music, I was listening to a lot of like emo music. Then I kind of moved into the punk zone where I was listening to like Anti-Flag and Propagandhi, and like Against Me was like one of the biggest bands for me growing up. Like Laura Jane Grace is kind of my like,
Okay.
I love everything about her. But like older punk as well, like like Patti Smith and Television and all of that kind of echelon of punk was very formative too. So like I just think there's a through line between so many pieces of music, and punk is like a music for the people. And so like I'm trying to think of just like the charge at punk shows. You can't really beat that as far as like presence. Like people are there and connective and like engaging. So I think
Iggy Pop concerts are an
yeah.
example of high energy. I've seen
Oh
him
wow.
throw himself into the audience, and
Mm.
the feeling and the power that he
Yeah.
brings to the stage is really
Yeah.
just incredible.
Yeah, I like to incorporate a high energy with my live shows for sure, because it's like I'm excited to be there. I want to like get people on a frequency. So like yeah, I think that definitely still knits its way. Even though I don't play punk music, I think the ethos and uh, the frequency still makes its way through to my music and live shows for sure.
Okay, and the last question I want to ask you is where do you see your musical development going from here? And what do you think you will be doing musically in 5 years?
Interesting. I mean, as far as right now, post tour, I've been working on a new record that I have been writing over the course of about a year, and it's not announced as to when it will come out yet, but I can say that it's 2024. Um,
Okay, we'll
yeah,
keep that
yeah,
quiet.
and it's a concept album. It's one that's like very close to my heart, and it's also one that I'm in the production seat for the first time. I'm co-producing with a guy named Hawksley Berkman, who he's actually going to be playing in Europe like tomorrow. I think he's going to
Oh,
Norway and the UK. But yeah, he's been amazing, and it's been my first time in like the co-production seat producing something that I'm like one of my own work. So it's pretty cool. It's like a lot of the music that's coming out is very like decidedly a little bit weirder. It's just like I'm allowing myself to go places I haven't previously, and just go for the art that's like really fulfilling to me, instead of like oh, what about what about radio? What about like these things that like I've, you know, wanted to be aware of in the past, but I'm kind of at this point where I'm like, well, I think there's such a massive amount of artists right now, which is great, but it's also like so much to have to like break through in order to like, you know, at the emerging stage make a career
Mm-hmm.
sustainable. So it's like you might as well just do what you do best, however that comes about, because that's what you can do. Nobody else can do what you do. So I think that's what I'm going to be kind of focusing towards. Whether it's
I wonder if that's is that I wonder if that's a common sort of developmental phase. I saw a interview with Brett Anderson from
mm,
Suede, where he said basically the same thing that you were saying, that he'd done stuff for radio and other things and what other
yeah,
people wanted. Now he just wanted to go his own way and do
yeah,
what he liked.
absolutely. Well, I think the music industry is kind of funny in that way, where it's like it has to be. Especially, I do find in Canada there are like specific boxes where it's like if you do this and this, then you're allowed into this space or that space, or you know, radio, whatever. But then again, like
Yeah.
the industry is becoming less and less uh, sustainable as far as just like, you know, streaming income and like how we're, you know, touring expenses, just things are kind of like it's not quite adding up anymore. So it's like why confine yourself to the boxes that be.
Exactly. Well, I can feel there's the inner artist beginning to
Yeah,
bloom and coming out,
yeah,
and they're expressing yourself in new and marvelous ways. Well, listen, thank you so much for
thank
taking the
you,
time to have the interview, Skye, and I wish you all the best in your career and hope everything
thank
goes
you,
well for you.
thank
I'll
you
be
so much,
watching.
thanks for having me, this was awesome.